have change for a 10? Seriously, I got a 10 and does anybody have change for a 10? Doesn't matter what, but anybody?
My hand to yours.
No, change for a 10. You got, what do you have? 2 5s? Awesome. Thank you very much. Good, got that taken care of. So, now I've got 2 5s. Do I still have a $10 bill? No. Can you see a $10 bill? Is there any indication that I ever had a $10 bill? Really? All I have is 2 5s. There's no indication that I had a $10 bill. Only 2 5s, except the fact that you saw it earlier.
Not recorded on the camera.
We have it recorded. Is there a $10 bill in my hand? No, there is not a $10 bill in my hand. My $10 bill is completely changed into something brand new. And it makes me think, can God change us that much? Where what was before is not at all what is. We can't even see it. Can God change the people we know that much? Can God change our disappointments or our fears or our frustrations that much? Can God change our dreams or our hopes that much? I mean, how much can God change? See, I think sometimes there's certain amounts of change that are easy to wrap our minds around. Like it's possible to imagine certain kinds of change. We can grasp it. It's sort of within our ability to understand. I don't know if anybody was following this last couple of weeks. The United States men's national team of soccer, they're in their qualifying rounds for the World Cup. Okay, a few of you are following this. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks or a couple of months, but the U.S. has not been doing very well. And so up until about 10 days ago, they had lost all their games, and they only had a few points in their qualifying pool. And so they were getting set to play Panama. Now, Panama was not ranked particularly well, and the U.S. was ranked higher. So everybody was thinking the U.S. is a shoo-in to win this game. This is going to go well. And the U.S. needs to win because it was not doing well. And so what happened with Panama? Anybody remember? No, we won. The U.S. won 4-0. We beat Panama. And everybody's like, that's good. Oh man, we knew it was going to happen. You know, it was expected. And that was a change for the U.S. team. They were losing and now finally they won. But everybody thought, oh yeah, they should have won. So it makes sense. We can understand that kind of change. Well, then on Tuesday, the U.S. played Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is ranked lower than Panama. They were actually 99th ranked in the world. And everybody thought, oh, thankfully the U.S. team is playing Trinidad and Tobago. If they win this game or tie this game, they're a shoo-in for the World Cup. And what happened on Tuesday? The U.S. lost 2-1. It was terrible. That's a change that a lot of people could not put their minds around. It didn't make sense. It didn't seem possible until it happened. But all of a sudden, He did. Can God change that much? Where we can't grasp it, where we can't understand it, or we don't think it's possible, but can God do that much change? I mean, I want to say yes. Some of you are saying yes, and I want to say yes too. I mean, I want to say the God I serve and the Jesus I follow absolutely has that kind of power to be able to change and to answer these kinds of prayers that we pray a lot, and has the power to change me and other people when we need it most. But I want to be sure that that's true. I mean, I want evidence, I want to see it, I want examples, and I think we need to be sure, if we're saying that God can change that much, we need to be certain that God can really change that much. So we're going to look at a passage and see how much God can really change. The Bible talks a lot about change, in fact, all over the Bible. The Bible talks about different kinds of change. It talks about people's names being changed from one name to another to testify to the change that happened in their life. The Bible talks about in the Old Testament the people of God changing to become a new people. And there's a big change that happens. The Gospels are filled with change that Jesus brings. And so there's this kind of change from one person into another person. And there's dramatic kinds of change. So how does that change happen? And who's behind that change? And what's the formula? What are the steps that are needed to take in order to make that change happen? Now, how does all this work? How does change happen? Well, Saul was a gentleman who was very well known in his day, but he was not very well liked. Saul was the greatest enemy, some people said, against the Christian faith. He was so much an enemy that he wanted to stop this whole movement of people who followed Jesus, and he wanted to weed out all the people who were in this movement to follow Jesus. See, Saul grew up in a very Jewish family. He grew up in a city called Tarsus, which is a long way from Jerusalem, where he went to school. It's kind of like he was sent to boarding school. And he was sent there because it was a specialized school for becoming an expert in the Jewish faith. Saul was sent there so that he could train and grow and become kind of among the elite learners and authorities about what it meant to follow God and to be a Jewish leader. Paul also made it into that elite group called the Pharisees, and he was a Pharisee, which meant he was sort of one of the authoritative people in his faith. He was one of the leaders. People would look to him and say, that guy knows what he's talking about. He's an example of what it means to follow God. So this is the kind of authority figure and kind of the training that Saul had and the person that Saul was. He was so confident, he was so learned, and he kept on learning after he had learned from the greatest teachers. So the first time that we meet Saul was actually in the book of Acts. It's when the apostle Stephen was on trial. And when Stephen was on trial, Stephen was a follower of Jesus, and he was on trial by the Pharisees and other Jewish leaders to figure out, did he really speak against God in an inappropriate way? Well, Saul was one of the people who was there at that trial, and Saul heard what was happening. And so the Bible describes this about Saul. It says Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. So we're getting a picture of Saul, aren't we? That he was more than just against the followers of Jesus. He was trying to just eradicate this whole movement of people who followed Jesus. He was utterly against it. He wanted this whole Jesus movement to go away. And so in order to do this, Saul hunted down these followers of Jesus. He didn't just create policies and legislation against them. He actually got warrants for their arrest, and he went out to find them and to bring them back and imprison them by arresting them. I mean, he was as active as you can get being against Jesus and Jesus' movement. So, Acts describes this. Meanwhile, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. So he went to the high priest. He requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any of the followers of the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. So Saul supported the destruction of this Jesus movement. He was convinced that he needed to get rid of all these followers of Jesus. He did all kinds of things to make this happen. No wonder people were scared of Saul. I mean, I would be. He was against everything that they stood for. So Saul's mission is to get rid of all of these followers of Jesus and to get rid of this whole movement. And here's what happened to Saul. As he was approaching Damascus on this mission, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. And the voice replied, "I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men with Saul stood speechless, for they heard the sound of someone's voice, but saw no one. Saul picked himself up off the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he was blind. So his companions led him by the hand to Damascus. He remained there blind for 3 days and did not eat or drink. And after several days, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he got up and was baptized. And Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus for a few days, and immediately he began preaching about Jesus in the synagogues, saying, "He is indeed the Son of God." Now all who heard him were amazed. "Isn't this the same man who caused such devastation among Jesus' followers in Jerusalem?" they asked. "And didn't he come here to arrest them and take them in chains to the leading priests?" Some change is believable. Some change we can understand, we can grasp. Can you imagine these people trying to digest this change? I mean, the guy who was an utter enemy one day, a matter of a few days later, is preaching about the thing he was just against. And he was so fervently against it that he supported killing these people, and now he's supporting this movement. I mean, this does not fall in the realm of understandable change. This is just complete, impossible change. How could Paul go from this all the way to this in just a matter of a few days? I mean, what happened so that Saul could be that different? I mean, you wonder, was Saul looking for a change? Was Saul thinking, maybe I'm wrong? Maybe I'm going down the wrong path? I mean, was Saul thinking he needed to change? There's no indication that Saul thought he needed to change. He was all in, going this direction. So it's not that he thought he should change. So according to what we know, according to what the Bible tells us, what changed Saul? There was only one thing that changed Saul. It was Jesus just showing up. I mean, Jesus changed Saul. Somewhere between the blinding and the baptism, there was a change. And we don't know what it was, and we don't know when it was. We don't know if it was in his mind first that made him logically realize that something needed to change, or if it was in his heart and he grew a new passion for these followers of Jesus or for Jesus himself. We don't know what specifically changed or when. All we know is who changed Saul. That's all we get. And I think it's easy when we see something like that to start scratching our head and studying and thinking, what steps happened for Saul to go from here to here? You know, what's the formula? How can we prepare ourselves and poise ourselves for change? How can we put ourselves in the right place so that Jesus can change us? You know, what can we do? What tasks can we fulfill? What details can we attend to so that we can be changed, we can be faithful? And do we get those details? We don't get details. We just get change. And we see shocking evidence of this kind of change. The one obvious factor is that Jesus showed up and changed Saul. And I think if there's ever one of these big picture moments about truth of what God does, it's this kind of thing. That sometimes it's just that God changes us. I mean, in the Old Testament, when the people of God became not a people and now a people, what changed? God showed up. Or what happened when Jesus miraculously healed people of diseases that nobody else could heal? Jesus just showed up and healed. I mean, there's no other way of describing or explaining what happened except the fact that Jesus changed people. God and Jesus have this unmatched ability to be able to change people. Change the world. Change even you and me. There's a change that we can't make happen in our lives, but sometimes God can. Saul's life, and this moment in his faith journey, is a testament to the fact that God can change us. Jesus can change people. Jesus can change you and me. And as Jean Marie read just a few minutes ago, anyone who belongs in Christ, Paul wrote, has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. You know, Paul wrote that, and it makes sense after reading his story. It makes sense why he would write this, that the old life is gone and a new life has begun. I mean, that's Paul's story. He lived it. And now he's seeing that Jesus can do this in all kinds of people's lives. This is the impossible, crazy kind of change that Jesus can make. Real, thorough, deep kinds of change. Jesus can do a complete change. Do you know anybody who needs complete change? You know anybody besides yourself that needs complete change? Yeah, we know people who just need a turnaround in their lives. They need circumstances to change. They need health to change. They need confidence to completely do a 180. They need all kinds of change to happen. They need peace to fill that void. They need something to completely change. I think so often when I hear somebody's story, or I know you hear somebody's story, especially a story that hits us hard, we feel like that needs a change. That needs the complete kind of change that Jesus can bring. Because it's not just that Jesus changes us, it's that Jesus can completely change. And there's times when that happens. It doesn't always happen, but Jesus shows that it's possible for him to make complete change. There's usually a moment in everybody's life. Some people call it a conversion moment. Some people call it an accepting Christ moment. We call it all kinds of things. But there's usually a moment or a period in our lives when we change. When we go from, say, not having a relationship with Christ to having a relationship with Christ. Paul's story is probably a model of this. And we have all kinds of names for this. We call it accepting Christ, or deciding for Christ, or committing to Christ, or converting to Christ, or deciding to follow, or know Christ, or live for Christ. And we call it all kinds of different things. But there's usually a time, or a season, or so often a moment, when Jesus changes us completely. That happened for me when I was in high school. It was the summer before my sophomore year in high school. And I wasn't actually looking for a change. Because, I grew up in a home that had a lot of church. And I had a lot of familiarity with church and the Bible and faith. And so I grew up with it. And it was natural in my life. But when I went to the summer camp, it was a summer when a couple of my best friends had become not best friends anymore. And so I had this strange void in my life of best friends. And I hadn't asked Jesus to fix it. I don't remember ever praying saying, Jesus, I need you to fix this problem. But Jesus did. I was at camp, and I was at a campfire one evening, and at that evening, whatever happened, whatever somebody said, or whatever Jesus did, I got changed. And there was something in my heart that made me want something that I didn't have before. And that was a changed heart and a passion to live differently. And so at the suggestion of some of the leaders, I prayed a prayer to accept Christ, or invite Christ, or receive Christ into my life. And it was interesting what happened. Because it wasn't in that moment that anything really changed except for my interest or desire to have Christ. It was over the year or two after that I noticed that I changed. I went from being a very shy and introverted, almost hide in a cave kind of kid, to a much more outgoing and gregarious and confident person. And it wasn't because I was great at all. It was because God was changing me into the person that he made me to be. And so much of that, I think, was wrapped up in me being even more confident about who God made me to be. And if I can be confident about who God made me to be, then I'm just naturally a different person. And that change was real. And that change happened. Jesus can do change. And there's so often a point in our lives when Jesus does substantial change. Usually that's at a time when we call it, accepting Christ, or coming into a relationship with Christ. That time happened in Saul's life, and it was an important time. That time happens in our lives, and it's important to remember and to know. That time can happen in all kinds of people's lives. And in those times, it's not just that Jesus comes in and changes. It's that Jesus comes in, as Corinthians says, and Jesus brings new life. I mean, remember that passage. Anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. There is a new life that's beginning. Accepting Christ is not the end. A new relationship with Christ is not the goal. There's so much more that Jesus brings. And it's like it's a launch pad to being pushed into a new life that Jesus brings. I mean, Jesus opens up new doors and creates new opportunities and does new things so that we can live a different kind of life. I know Jesus has changed many of us. And we have a great story to tell about the ways that Jesus has changed us in the moments that happened in our lives. But certainly not all of us have been changed in that way. There's times when we need more change. There's times when we haven't received that change or felt that change or known that change that Jesus can bring. And there's people we know who have not experienced that change or felt or sensed that change. One of the first things that we developed at RiverCross was developing a little brochure. We often have it on the table. I actually noticed today that we ran out of them, which is great. But it's a little brochure that just describes in as few words as possible what God does when God changes us and how that process even works. And it's general and it's simple. But it's one of the first things that we developed because we need to be able to describe that change and encourage people about that change and invite people into that change. Because it really is simple. You know, when Jesus stirs our hearts and makes us realize that we need a change, all we do is we pray. You know, we pray, God, thank you for showing love to me. Thank you that you do love me. I want a relationship with you, and you invite me into it. So, I want a relationship with you. I mean, it's as simple as that can be. You know, when some of our friends ask, well, what does that look like? And what does it mean to be in a relationship with Jesus? It's as simple as that. And then when we do, I mean, one of the things I encourage people to do is, if you've ever prayed that prayer, if you know somebody who's prayed that, make sure to tell somebody. Because we're not meant to just continue on this life that Jesus has created us by ourselves. That's why Jesus invented the church. Because we need each other, don't we, to be able to live this life that Jesus gave us to live. We need each other to inspire us and spur us on and encourage us. So we got to tell each other. And one of the ways that at least we talk about this life, this new life that Jesus has given us, the way that we've developed talking about it is worshiping, connecting, and serving. It's as simple as we can get. And if we live a life that is full of worship and connecting in relationships and serving others, that's sort of the essence of the life that Jesus has given us. We fill in the blanks, we fill in the specifics about what that means and what that looks like, and there's so many opportunities for how to do that. But it's a rhythm and a set of habits for how we can live in this way that Jesus has given us. Can Jesus change us that much? Can Jesus change us this much? This impossible, crazy kind of change? Absolutely He can. That's the God we serve. That's the God we follow. And that's the kind of God whose life we want to live. So let's pray.